Welcome, and what we are doing today is once again going deeper into the 9.1 additions in the PTR. Today we look into the Covenant ability legendaries, because Blizzard is going to add these to 9.1. Now, while exciting and interesting, particularly if your Covenant ability is pretty strong, there is the sort of disappointing taste in your mouth, which is the fact that you can't wear two of your legendaries. So effectively, you always have to compare these with your best in slot legendary, what you're already using, and if it doesn't beat that, then it's a useless legendary. So there is that part that we have to state before going in these additions. There could still be the chance. I am optimistic. As always, I hope that Blizzard is hiding this change to pull out later on about being able to use two legendaries, but for now, of course, we have to assume we won't in 9.1. Not all of the specs are getting out these legendaries right now. I'm sure in the next days, in the next weeks, whenever, they're all gonna come out. So for now, let's go over the dozen or so that are available. Let's start with Death Knight. So Death Knight gets an Abomination Limb legendary. So on top of lasting longer and giving you more procs of your passive, the cool thing it's gonna do, this legendary, is giving you 10% more damage for 12 seconds for all enemies hit by Abomination Limb. Now, this looks good, right? It looks like a good legendary, but as always, you have to compare it with some of your best in slot legendaries, because you can only wear one. For example, when you look at Frenzied Monstrosity for Unholy Death Knight already gives you 12% more damage. Not just to you, but to your pet as well. And you don't have to have pulled an enemy with the Abomination Limb. It's to all enemies. On top of giving you 12% attack speed to you and your pet, which is to be compared to the extra procs of your passives and the damage that Abomination Limb can do, etc, etc. So the effect looks powerful, of course. The damage increase is very good because it strengthens your burst, which is what Unholy can do. This procs off of Abomination Limb, which is very good because the cooldown of Abomination Limb is lower than the abilities you use for bursts, so it is always going to be up and available if you want to. Then it is just going to boil down to simulation, to simming, and to see exactly how much damage you can get with this. Now, at the cost of giving some PTSD to Death Knights, we have to talk about Death's Due. We have to talk about Night Fae. We have to talk about the possibility of this one becoming the strongest legendary and you having to reroll into a fairy, because Rampant Transference is going to give you 1% more strength on your Death's Due stacking of strength, as well as making it last longer and giving you 20% runic power generation. Again, this is mostly going to be up to simming. However, I'm just going to point out that the scaling of this ability is very good. Giving you percentage strength is very powerful, and giving you runic power generation increase is also pretty powerful when it comes to scaling. So there might be the chance that maybe you are safe for 9.1, but come 9.2, this legendary will become very powerful to the point you have to accept the fact that you have to start role-playing a furry. That's just how it is. Then you have the two least played Covenants. You have Kyrian and Ventir. Pretty much Ventir populated by mostly Blood Death Knights and nothing else. The Kyrian one, when Shackle the Unworthy spreads, instantly gain a rune and your damage is increased by 2%, stacking up to 10%. So another legendary giving you flat percentage damage. Of course, this is way more AoE centered because the effect happens when it spreads. When you're fighting one target, this is going to have a much lower effectiveness. This is also very unlikely that it is going to be picked because most specs, they go for more of a diverse power in their Covenant ability. The more interesting one is Insatiable Hunger, because it's already being used by Blood DKs, by quite a few of them. Not really by the rest, but it does have also an interesting take, because it's almost as if Blizzard knew that this Covenant was being played by tanks the most, so it gives them a healing component. When Mist ends, is going to deal extra damage plus 2% for every 1 runic power spent while Swarming Mist was active, as well as healing you for 25% of the damage you dealt, which in AoE is basically going to mean lay on hands. It's basically going to mean you get healed to full. Now this seems very powerful when you just look at the numbers, right? The damage increase, the healing, and the healing increase based on your damage, right? It seems all very big. There is a problem. Sort of like a clunkiness problem, which is the fact that all this big damage increase and all this big healing coming at the end only comes when Swarming Mist ends. You don't get to decide when you proc it. Unless, and this is where the clunkiness comes in, you have to manually use a Cancel Aura macro and basically end Swarming Mist prematurely just because you want the big burst of healing. Or maybe the big burst of damage, because the big Mythic Plus pack is about to die, so when Insatiable Hunger ends, there's only like 2 targets alive, and not 15, and you're losing tons of damage in AoE. But it does have a nice flavor, particularly when it comes to Blood Decays, particularly because Swarming Mist has a very short cooldown. Swarming Mist has a 1-minute cooldown, which is what I will continue to repeat is very powerful in the kiting meta. Having short, powerful cooldowns is very good in the kiting meta of Mythic Plus. Giving you a legendary which powers up the 1-minute cooldown is very good. Now, being done with Death Knight, we have to go to Druid. Druid is currently lacking Kyrian, and there is also just the speculation about Nightfey. Of course, Nightfey being, the more important one for Druids. So, Sinful Hysteria is for Ravenous Frenzy. Each time Ravenous Frenzy is applied, its duration is increased by 0.2 seconds. This roughly, in rough terms, means Ravenous Frenzy lasts for 4 more seconds. Actually, more like 4.5, kind of, so that's what it is. There are still scaling connoisseurs pointing out that it's very likely that deeper into the expansion, Ravenous Frenzy is going to overtake Convoke the Spirits. Very likely. I don't think it's going to happen in 9.1, but this is of course making it stronger. Just like Wrathful Swarm for your Adaptive Swarm. Now, Adaptive Swarm is one of my favorite Covenant abilities for the flavor, for how it works with your kit, buffing and functioning both around your dots and your hots. This is a very interesting legendary when it comes to the effect. Adaptive Swarm has a 30% chance to split into 2 swarms each time it jumps. And then of course the 2 swarms also have a 30% chance to split, etc, etc. It looks very nice at first glance when you imagine multiple swarms, 5, 6 swarms, because the more that duplicate, the more they are going to essentially create this snowball, right? This avalanche of more and more and more proccing Adaptive Swarms. There is a problem though with this legendary. Adaptive Swarm can also jump to allies, so imagine you throw this at your main target, and then the next thing it does, it procs twice, except it goes back to your 2 DPS at the back. Okay, thanks. And it can do the opposite if you're a Restoration Druid. Maybe you put this on your tank, and then when it procs, it just jumps on 2 targets that are about to die. If it is an automated, chance to jump, it should give priority if you're in Balance or Feral spec to jump to enemies, and if you're in Restoration spec to jump to allies, to be fair. But let's move to the important one. Let's move to the moneymaker of Druid, which is Convoke the Spirits. Now, this is not actually certain. It's only been speculated as an ability, not sure if it is going to be part of your legendary toolkit or something like a Torghast power. So the effect reads, Convoke the Spirits cooldown is reduced by 1 minute, so it goes to being a 1-minute cooldown, and will use an exceptional spell more often. The number of spells cast by Convoke are halved and occur over half the original channel duration. So it's a 2-second channel casting half the spell, but with pretty much at least 1 guaranteed full moon, possibly 2, if you're balanced, for example. Now, of course, it's irrelevant to talk about how strong it can be in terms of damage, because only a sim would be able to figure this out. Reducing Convoke to 1 minute is very good, but what you need to make Convoke worth is Celestial Alignment. So Celestial Alignment, unfortunately, still has a 3-minute cooldown. So Convoke the Spirits is so dependent on CA that you even delay Convoke the Spirits when it has 2-minute cooldown to make it together with Celestial Alignment. If it had a 1-minute cooldown, you could freely use it, because it was always coming back for Celestial Alignment, but the power of it being halved in effectiveness probably wouldn't be worth. It is, to be fair, a shame that if it is a legendary, it's going to not be able to be used at the same time with Primordial Arcanic Pulsar legendary, because that would be fun. With that legendary combined with this, you would be able to have a proc of Celestial Alignment roughly every minute, which is going to line up with the cooldown of your Convoke. Unfortunately, we are back at the start, which is you can't use 2 legendaries. So for now, even if this were to be a legendary, doesn't look like it's going to be too powerful. Although at the end, we have to point out it is simulations that are going to predict whether or not it is going to be powerful. After Druid, we have Mage. Just like Druid, Mage also doesn't have a Night Fae ability, which is a shame because Shifting Power is the one for Fire Mage. Although the Fire Mage Legendary is already so powerful for your combustion that it's very unlikely that whatever is going to buff Shifting Power is going to change the priorities for Fire Mage. Talking about the one that is being used is Sinful Delight, being used for Frost. Consuming your proc charges, so Clear Cast, Fire Blast, and Brain Freeze, is going to reduce Mirrors of Torment cooldown by 3 seconds. And that's basically it. This could be very powerful for Frost Mage, but again, you just have to sim your strongest legendary compared to this one to see if it works, to see if it works out. This is not nearly as powerful for Fire Mages and for Arcane Mages because of the importance they put on their procs, on their Clear Cast and Fire Blast charges. Frost is way more dependent on its procs. Frost is basically going to spam Frostbolt forever if they don't get Brain Freeze and if they don't get Fingers of Frost. So it could be actually pretty strong for Frost, not so for the other two. Harmonic Echo is going to be changed to give you even more AoE damage on your Radiant Spark. The damage dealt to enemies affected by the Spark's vulnerability is going to echo to 4 nearby enemies for 25% of the damage dealt. Again, this seems to be sort of like a crutch for specs that don't really have as strong of an AoE, that they want to have the help of a legendary. Fire Mage, for example, doesn't need this. Frost Mage also very unlikely would need this. Arcane could actually use this when it comes to AoE damage, particularly because they can have very high single target damage, so they can use this to further empower the AoE damage they do by splashing it to other targets. They already have talents that can make it so that they can splash damage to other targets, so maybe this is going to work for Arcane. The other legendary is going to be Death's Fathom, the one for your Deathborn big fat cooldown. Deathborn has already been buffed in 9.0.5 and nobody cared. This one though is going to add something cool, some cool effect. Your Fireball, Frostbolt and Arcane Blast have a chance to grant you Deathborn for 8 seconds. While in the form of a Skeletal Mage, the spell damage granted is increased by 1% for each enemy hit by Fireball, Frostbolt and Arcane Blast. So it also gives you an extra AoE part to your Deathborn. Deathborn as basically just a cleave element. Not to mention, it also has one of the most powerful effects that is often used for big cooldowns, which is the chance to proc it at a shorter duration. We have this with Paladins, which can proc 3 wings for a few seconds. You have this with Vengeance Demon Hunters, which can proc their Metamorphosis whenever they use Fell Devastation, and these are always very powerful effects. So this one is also a very powerful one. It's going to have a 1.25 proc per minute, so basically proc every like 45 seconds, giving you 8 seconds of Deathborn. So this could be very powerful especially for Mythic Plus, where every 45-ish seconds is when you're pulling a new pack of enemies. So it could line up really well in Mythic Plus. And lastly, so far, what we have is Warrior. Warrior as an insane one, but first we have to go to Night Fae. Nature's Fury, buffing your Aftershock. Ancient Aftershock's duration is increased by 3 seconds, and enemies hit take extra nature damage over 6 seconds, stacking up 6 times. Again, this is just flat out pure damage, so there is no cool effect, no new buffs or anything, no new synergy, it's just more damage. It's gonna be up to actually seeing how much damage that's gonna turn out to be. The ones that aren't about damage and they are much more complicated to gauge in their strength are Glory and Sinful Surge. So Glory is the Necrolord legendary, which is going to give your Conqueror's Banner, your newly reworked Conqueror's Banner, affect 1 additional ally, and every 20 rage or 10 rage if you're protection spent while it's active, it's going to increase the duration of your banner by half a second. This can be very powerful. Just the extra buttload of mastery to an extra player can be very powerful for your DPSers in your burst, and then the fact that you can spend rage to extend the duration, this can even double the duration of your banner, so it can become very powerful. Again, no damage is the complete opposite of the Ancient Aftershock legendary. It's very difficult to gauge this properly right now. Another one that is going to be very difficult but seems very strong is Sinful Edge. Condemn extends the duration of Colossus Smash for arms, 1.5 seconds, Recklessness for Fury, 3 seconds, and then Last Stand for Protection Warrior by 4 seconds. Now, Protection Warriors are not really going to use this too much at all, but Fury and Arms. So Fury right now has moved over to Night Fae mostly, but Arms is still mostly Ventir, and also Arms is the one that makes the most use out of Condemned. You know, this is your run-of-the-mill Arms performance when they are in execute phase. You know, that's 20 Condemns being used in basically 25 seconds. That would give you some significantly increased duration on your Colossus Smash, which is significant. It's less powerful for Fury, of course, because they don't use Condemn as much. They are much more gated by refreshing the Rampage so often, and also the fact that their Recklessness duration increase is not as powerful as Colossus Smash, so they would also be gaining not as much as an Arms Warrior. But these are all that we have right now. The rest of the stuff is mostly really just centered around the change to your Soulbinds. Blizzard is lengthening the Soulbind tree. It is adding 3 new lines, 3 new rows for your Soulbinds. It is going to add a bunch of new passives, possibly some new conduit actives for you to collect and use. So far, looking at them, there isn't really some major end of the Soulbind tree super powerful pick like we had in the release of the expansion. Decision-making changers that made you go for one Covenant or the other purely because of how powerful the passives were. Looking at them right now, since they are all already in the game, they are all already fleshed out, there is nothing missing, there aren't many of them that look incredibly powerful like you had at the start of the expansion with the first ones we got. So it doesn't look like we are going to end up in a situation where you're going to have to change Covenant just because these new Soulbind passives are going to be so strong, which will make you transfer to a different one. It seems unlikely so far. It is, of course, much more likely that you will have to change a Covenant because of the Legendary that is going to be added in the game, synergizing with that Covenant ability. That's way more likely to be the case. So, we are done with this for now. We're going to continue reporting on 9.1 for the other things. To be fair, much less important than this. So, things like mounts, pets and toys. You have things like the story continuing, the new zone, Korthia, of course, the new raid and the new dungeon and all that stuff. But first we had to lay down the crucial things. So the power increases, the balance changes and whatnot to all of the classes and specs. And then of course remember that if you want to support this channel, you should leave a like, a comment, a follow, a subscribe, a donation to my charity, a signed letter of praises, and also name your firstborn after me. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, man, there is like 40 mounts in 9.1. 40! What the hell?